A single American PBY Catalina flying boat patrols the vast Pacific Ocean on the morning of the 25th of October 1942. Piloted by Lieutenant Warren Matthew, the PBY is looking for enemy warships in the area north of the island of Guadalcanal. At 9:40 am, Lieutenant Matthew's patrol sweep finally bears fruit. A large Japanese fleet of 2 battleships, 3 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser and 7 destroyers is spotted below heading southeast. Matthew circles while his radio man broadcasts the position of the enemy warships to Allied bases, listening in on the search frequency. Once the location of the Japanese fleet is recorded, Matthew's mission is complete. However, the young lieutenant has been itching for a chance at combat and decides to launch a brazen attack on one of the battleships. He swings the PBY around and executes a bombing approach on one of the 2 Congo-class battleships in the centre of the formation, attacking the target from a shallow angle. The aircraft is armed only with 2 depth charges to use against submarines, but Matthew flies through the heavy flak fire and releases his munitions. The depth charges fall well short of the battleship, and Matthew pulls the aircraft into a tight escape turn. The battleship Kirishima launches 2 F-1M Pete float planes, which chase the PBY, but are beaten away by the patrol bomber's rear gunners. Matthew and his crew flee back to friendly airspace as more sightings of Japanese warships north of Guadalcanal are reported to Allied bases. After playing a game of chicken for months, the Americans and Japanese are about to collide in one of the bloodiest carrier battles of the Second World War. A quick word on this week's sponsor, World of Warships, a free-to-play naval warfare-themed game available on PC. Fight in 600 warships, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers and submarines from 10 nations, in exciting real-time combat on over 40 unique maps in a large active online community. This year, the United States Navy is celebrating its 250th anniversary. To mark this momentous milestone, World of Warships is launching an exciting limited-time event, Liberty Harbor. Starting in October, players can take on the role of a US naval officer to build Liberty Harbor, an interactive naval base that is constructed by completing missions and expeditions. You'll collect exclusive rewards along the way, including the brand new epic Tier 8 premium cruiser Bridgeport. Whether you're a new recruit or a returning commander, there's something for everyone. New players can join today with the invite code STEPUP250 and instantly unlock the American Tier 3 cruiser St. Louis, 20 days premium account time, a port slot and a commander. You can then unlock even more rewards by completing missions. Returning players can rejoin the fight and claim special rewards available only during this event. Tackle Liberty Harbor missions to collect valuable items and dive back in with fresh ships and content. Celebrate 250 years of naval history by building your Liberty Harbor today. Click my link in the description to claim your special rewards. Please note our code is only for new players who register for the first time on the Wargaming portal. Thanks to World of Warships for sponsoring this video. Initially a sideshow in the Pacific War, the Battle of Guadalcanal has become a grinding campaign of attrition between the United States and the Empire of Japan. Both sides are pouring resources into the fight, where the prize is the island's strategically vital Henderson airfield, which controls the main sea lane between the United States and Australia. The situation is becoming increasingly desperate for both combatants. The US 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions, along with elements of the Army's 23rd Americal Infantry Division, are firmly entrenched on Guadalcanal, and have successfully defeated Japanese attempts to take Henderson Field. However, the US Navy has suffered heavy losses keeping the supply route to the island, and the naval battle for control over the South Pacific is teetering on a knife's edge. The Naval Aviation Arm has been hit especially hard, and South Pacific Area Commander Vice Admiral Robert Gormley is pessimistic that Guadalcanal can be held. After the USS Enterprise was damaged in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, the fleet carriers Wasp and Saratoga were both hit by Japanese submarine attacks in mid-September. Saratoga is forced to take on repairs in New Caledonia, but Wasp is sunk. As of early October, the USS Hornet is the only Allied aircraft carrier in the area and represents the last line of defense for the Guadalcanal garrison against attacks from the sea. In Pearl Harbor, work crews toil around the clock to repair Enterprise and return her to fighting condition. Her presence at the next battle could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The Japanese are also searching for a quick end to the campaign, which has become a significant drain on the Empire's dwindling war resources. The first attempt to take back the airfield in late August failed, when the Japanese ground offensive was annihilated in the Battle of Alligator Creek, and the naval counterattack was turned back at the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. Another ground offensive in mid-September also failed with heavy losses. Since then, the Japanese have struggled to build up enough forces on the island to recapture Henderson Field. Thanks to Allied air superiority during the day, the Imperial Navy has been forced to shuttle men and supplies to Guadalcanal at night via the Tokyo Express route. The Japanese Navy has inflicted sharp defeats on the Allies in night actions around the island, but is also suffering losses it can ill afford. More importantly, the Japanese have thus far failed to lure the American carriers into a decisive battle where they can be destroyed. The commander of the combined fleet, Isoroku Yamamoto, knows that a stalemate only benefits the Allies, who will inevitably turn the tide using their superior industrial capacity. He resolves to destroy Allied resistance on Guadalcanal and on the seas with one stroke. Yamamoto plans to mount a naval offensive at the same time the Japanese army launches their third attempt to retake Henderson Field. The ground commander on the island, General Harukichi Hyakutake, has assured Yamamoto that the army will have no problem crushing the resistance around Henderson Field this time. Once the Allied naval forces rush to defend Guadalcanal, the Imperial Navy will throw the majority of its strength into the battle, including 5 aircraft carriers. If all goes to plan, the US Navy will have to choose whether to fight a decisive battle with inferior numbers, or retreat from Guadalcanal and abandon its defenders. On the 11th of October, the combined fleet leaves its anchorage on the island of Truk, en route for the Solomon Islands. 2 days later, the battleships Congo and Haruna bombard Henderson Field to soften up the Allied defences. 38 of the 39 dive bombers on Guadalcanal are destroyed, while a large reinforcement convoy carrying 4,500 men for the Imperial Army lands on the island on the night of the 14th to the 15th of October. While the army is preparing for the ground offensive, the Japanese Navy is lying in wait for the American aircraft carriers to come to Guadalcanal's rescue. Yamamoto's combined fleet numbers 61 ships, split into 3 formations. The main carrier force, also known as the Kido Butai, is under the command of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who is seeking redemption after the disastrous defeat at Midway in June. Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo leads the advance force, which, per new naval doctrine, will operate 100 to 120 miles ahead of Nagumo's carriers as an air defense picket, to reduce the chance of a surprise air attack. Finally, Rear Admiral Abe Hiroaki's vanguard force will mop up any remaining Allied naval forces after the carrier battle is over. The Commander-in-Chief of the US Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester Nimitz, moves quickly to prepare for the imminent naval battle. Fed up with Vice Admiral Gormley's pessimism, Nimitz sacks the South Pacific Area Commander and replaces him with Vice Admiral William Halsey. Unlike the cautious Gormley, Halsey is an aggressive commander who lives up to his nickname of Bull. Nimitz has chosen him because he knows Halsey will take the fight to the enemy. Even more important is the reappearance of the USS Enterprise. Following extensive repairs, Enterprise leaves Pearl Harbor on the 16th of October with a replenished air group aboard. Meanwhile, the Japanese combined fleet continues to patrol the waters north of the Solomon Islands, remaining just outside the range of Allied land-based aircraft. The Japanese fleet carrier Hio suffers an engineering space fire on the 21st of October and is forced to return to Truk for repairs. On the 23rd of October, the Japanese launch their third ground offensive to retake Henderson Field. While the battle rages on the island, the cat-and-mouse game of carrier warfare begins anew. Both fleets spend the next 3 days searching for each other as scout planes sweep the seas around the Santa Cruz Islands. Early on the morning of the 24th of October, American PBY Catalinas spot and attack the Japanese vanguard force. The attack fails to cause any damage, but Vice Admiral Nagumo decides to move his carriers away from Guadalcanal to the northwest, against Yamamoto's orders, leaving the rest of the Japanese fleet sailing south alone. Nagumo only reverses course later that night after being reprimanded by his superior officer. The command dysfunction within the Imperial Navy is still a serious issue. On that same day, Enterprise and Task Force 16 under the command of Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid rendezvous with the USS Hornet and Task Force 17, 250 miles northeast of the island of Espiritu Santo. Another round of searches by both sides before nightfall fails to uncover anything, leaving both Halsey and Yamamoto in the dark. At 1:30 am on the 25th of October, Yamamoto is informed by a triumphant army officer that Henderson Field has fallen. In response, the carrier Junyo launches 24 aircraft the next day to overfly the airfield which is supposedly in Japanese hands. Instead, they find American land-based fighters still defending the airspace above Guadalcanal, leaving no doubt that the Japanese ground offensive has failed. Shocked by the news, Nagumo once again retreats to the northwest to stay ahead of the morning searches by Allied patrol aircraft. This time, however, all three Japanese fleets are spotted by 11:03 am, including the Kido Butai, which is at the extreme range for American aircraft. Rear Admiral Kinkaid attempts to launch a strike at 2 pm with 35 aircraft from Enterprise, but the result is a disaster. Only 19 aircraft are able to take off, and the airstrike fails to find the enemy fleet. 8 pilots are forced to ditch in the ocean because of fuel starvation. Despite this failure, Kinkaid moves the newly established Task Force 61 of Enterprise and Hornet to the north of the Santa Cruz Islands, in order to close the gap between the two fleets. The two American carriers can only launch a reduced complement of 137 aircraft against 194 Japanese, but Vice Admiral Halsey has promised the Marine commanders on Guadalcanal that he would take the fight to the enemy no matter the odds. At 12:22 am on the 26th of October, a PBY reports the sighting of a Japanese destroyer in the Vanguard Force 300 miles northwest of Task Force 61. 2 hours later, another PBY spots the Japanese main carrier fleet heading south and attacks the carrier's Wikaku. The bombing run is unsuccessful, but the indecisive Nagumo again switches course to the north. His fleet is running low on fuel, and he does not want to be ambushed like at Midway. However, both carrier forces are now separated by only 200 miles, so close to each other that a confrontation on the 26th of October is unavoidable. Vice Admiral Nagumo dispatches 9 scout aircraft at 4:45 am and orders 70 strike aircraft on standby to be ready to launch when the American fleet is found. Aboard Enterprise and Hornet, the alarm calling the men to general quarters sounds at 4:50 am as Kinkaid prepares to launch a morning search. It is now a race to see which side can find the enemy's carriers first and launch a concentrated attack. USS Enterprise turns southeast into the wind and launches 16 Dauntless dive bombers at 5:20 am to search for the enemy. Only 25 minutes later, 2 Dauntlesses encounter a single Japanese scout torpedo bomber, but neither side engages the other, instead focusing on accomplishing their missions of finding the other's carriers. The Japanese Vanguard force is spotted at 6:30 am, but 4 Dauntlesses from Enterprise stumble upon the main prize 20 minutes later, the Kido Butai. 8 minutes later, a report from a Japanese scout aircraft reaches Nagumo, claiming that an American aircraft carrier has been found 210 miles to the southeast. Both Kinkaid and Nagumo immediately order their carrier air groups to launch a first strike. A force of 64 aircraft from the light carriers Zuho and the fleet carriers Wikaku and Shokaku begins lifting off at 7:25 am and heads southeast 5 minutes later. Yet, it is the Americans who once again strike first. 2 Enterprise Dauntlesses piloted by Lieutenant Stockton Strong and Ensign Charles Irvin arrive at the Kido Butai's location at 7:30 am, just as the Japanese strike force is forming up. Strong and Irvin have been following the reports of enemy carriers for the past 40 minutes, and the Japanese Type 21 search radar is not strong enough to detect their aircraft. The 2 pilots decide to attack what they think is the fleet carrier Shokaku, and use the scattered clouds to hide their approach, hopping from cloud to cloud until they are right on top of the carrier. The 2 Dauntlesses dive on what is actually the unsuspecting light carrier Zuho, and catch her crew completely by surprise. Without any anti-aircraft fire or Japanese fighters to stop them, both Strong and Irvin hit Zuho with 2 500-pound bombs, which impact the aft flight deck just forward of the elevator. 3 A6M0 fighters on deck explode, and a small fire breaks out. 2 airborne Zeros providing Combat Air Patrol, or CAP, finally spot the attackers and chase them off, although 1 Zero is shot down by one of the American rear gunners. The sudden attack has punched a hole 15 yards wide in Zuho's flight deck and destroyed several arresting wires, meaning the carrier could no longer recover aircraft. Vice Admiral Nagumo decides to send Zuho back to Truk for repairs, and the Kido Butai is down another carrier before the main battle has even begun. Meanwhile, Rear Admiral Kinkaid's Task Force 61 is launching its own strike. USS Hornet puts up 8 Wildcat fighters, 15 Dauntlesses, and 6 Avenger torpedo bombers between 7:32 am and 7:43 am, under the overall command of Lieutenant Commander Gus Widelm. This first group proceeds immediately to the target without waiting for the second wave of 8 fighters, 9 dive bombers, and 10 bomb-armed Avengers, which takes off 10 minutes later. Another 12 miles to the north, Enterprise is launching 8 Wildcats, 3 Dauntlesses, and 7 Avengers, led by Commander Dick Gaines. Every American aircraft stops briefly before launching to get instructions from a chalkboard held up by on-deck crewmen. When it's Avenger pilot Lieutenant Doc Norton's turn, he reads the chalkboard, which says, "Proceed without Hornet." Not only are Enterprise and Hornet functioning as separate carrier task forces, the strike commanders are told not to wait for the subsequent waves to launch. Instead, they head for the target as soon as their respective group has assembled. Like Admiral Spruance at Midway, Kinkaid is gambling that reaching the Japanese carriers as quickly as possible is more important than launching a single coordinated strike. Thus, the 3 groups of American aircraft proceed to the target independently, with each separated by around 15 minutes. Carrier warfare is still in its infancy, and both sides are experimenting with the best tactics to gain an advantage in combat. By 8:30 am, Lieutenant Commander Gus Widelm and Hornet's first strike group of 29 aircraft is around 60 miles into their journey, when they spot aircraft in the distance coming the opposite direction. This is the main Japanese strike formation of 64 aircraft, led by Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata. The low group of Avengers escorted by Wildcats pass directly underneath the Japanese dive bombers and torpedo bombers, with many individual gunners on both sides training their machine guns on each other. Yet, no fire is exchanged, and no fighters break formation as the opposing strike groups allow each other to pass without a fight. Widelm radios a warning back to Hornet that a large Japanese strike is inbound, while Murata does the same to Vice Admiral Nagumo's flagship, the fleet carrier Shokaku. 10 miles behind Widelm's group is the smaller Enterprise strike of 18 aircraft led by Commander Gaines, which is climbing slowly to conserve fuel. Most of Enterprise's aircraft do not have their radios turned on, and receive no warning of the much larger Japanese formation heading their way. At 8:35 am, 9 Zero fighters from the damaged Zuho, under the command of Lieutenant Sanayasu Hidaka, spot the Enterprise strike group climbing through the clouds. Hidaka is frustrated that Lieutenant Commander Murata denied his request to pursue the first wave of American aircraft, and decides to attack Enterprise's group without permission. Believing he can bounce the enemy squadron and return to the main strike group before they reach the target, Hidaka signals to the other Zeros under his command to follow him in a surprise attack. 6 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers are bringing up the rear of the American formation and are unaware of the danger lurking above. The Japanese Zeros nose over and dive out of the sun. Squadron leader Lieutenant Commander Jack Collett's lead aircraft is riddled by machine gun fire, as a frantic call goes out over the radio, "Bogey 6 o'clock." Collett's Avenger is shot down, with the turret gunner the only survivor. The torpedo bomber to Collett's starboard also bursts into flames and smashes into the ocean. A Zero is taken down by 50 caliber fire from one of the Avenger turret gunners, while the 4 Wildcats of Fighting Division 10 turn 180 degrees to meet the attackers head-on. Lieutenant Hidaka's Zeros plunge into the Wildcats, and a dogfight ensues. The interception is a disaster for the Americans. The sleek and nimble Zeros are in their element in this fight against the slower and less maneuverable Wildcats. 3 of the 4 fighters are shot down, and the last Wildcat rendered combat ineffective, while no Zeros are lost. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander James Flatley and the other 4 Wildcats of Fighting Squadron 10 are in the lead of the strike group when the Japanese attack. Flatley leads the fighters into a tight turn into the middle of the main formation, and turns the tables on Lieutenant Hidaka's fighters, who are surprised by the reinforcements. Flatley takes aim at the Zero, peppering Doc Norton's Avenger with machine gun fire, and pulls the trigger. The Zero begins smoking and hurtles into the waves below. 2 more Japanese aircraft are shot down by the sudden counterattack, and Lieutenant Hidaka's Zero is damaged. Hidaka signals a retreat, and the Japanese disappear, while Flatley orders his 4 remaining fighters not to pursue. 2 Avengers and 3 Wildcats have been shot down, while Norton's TBF is too badly damaged to continue. Norton, along with the damaged Wildcat, turn around to return to Enterprise, while the rest of the strike group presses on. 4 Zeros are lost in the unexpected dogfight, and Lieutenant Hidaka's gamble has deprived the main Japanese strike group of valuable fighter protection. This will prove important when Vice Admiral Nagumo launches his second wave of 44 aircraft at 9 AM. Although the Japanese now have 108 strike aircraft en route to the American carriers, there are now only 9 Zeros escorting the second wave of 19 dive bombers and 16 torpedo bombers. Miles away towards the Japanese fleet is Lieutenant Commander Wilhelm's Hornet strike group. At 8:50 AM, Wilhelm spots 4 Japanese warships below. These are the heavy cruisers Tone and Chikuma, along with destroyers who were part of Admiral Abe's vanguard force but became separated during high-speed manoeuvring. Confused at the small number of enemy ships, Wilhelm radios the escorting fighter skipper, Lieutenant Commander Mike Sanchez. Gus to Mike, do you see any carriers? The response comes back, Mike to Gus, no carriers in sight, let's return. Wilhelm and the rest of the strike group pilots are shocked at the cowardly response. But this is actually a Japanese radio interloper impersonating Sanchez. An enraged Wilhelm orders his group to press on and ignore his cowardly comrade. He will later punch the unsuspecting and bewildered Sanchez in the face due to this case of mistaken identity. After so much confusion and the hide-and-seek nature of carrier warfare, it is the Japanese who find their target first. At 8:52 AM, Commander Murata's first wave breaks free of the clouds with USS Hornet's Task Force 17 directly ahead. Lieutenant Commander Jack Griffin is the fighter direction officer for both American task forces, and has a strong force of 15 Wildcat fighters on cap duty over Hornet. But Griffin has made a critical mistake. The American fighters have been placed at 10,000 feet to conserve fuel, as Griffin believes that radar will give him plenty of early warning before the Japanese strike. The heavy cruiser USS Northampton will detect the raid 10 minutes earlier when it was still 70 miles out, but this critical information does not reach Griffin in time. There are now Japanese aircraft inbound above 17,000 feet, and not enough time for all of the Cap Wildcats to climb to meet them. Murata orders an immediate attack, and his formation splits into 2 groups. 21 VAL dive bombers and 8 Zero fighters from Zuikaku, under the command of Lieutenant Takahashi Samadu, deploy into 3 waves of 7 dive bombers with the Zeros providing top cover. Meanwhile, Murata leads 20 Kate torpedo bombers and 4 Zeros from Shikaku in a descent down to 300 feet above sea level to prepare an anvil attack. The veteran pilots of the Kido Butai have rehearsed these actions countless times and launched an impressively coordinated attack. Murata's radio operator is the same man who called out Tora 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 when the Japanese launched their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and now transmits the same order. Lieutenant Commander Griffin realizes his critical mistake when Enterprise's radar detects the attackers at 8:55 AM. He urgently dispatches 8 Wildcats to the west to meet the dive bombers, while releasing 8 more fighters from combat air patrol duty over Enterprise to reinforce Hornet's defenders. Despite the Wildcat's slow climb rate, the 8 fighters manage to reach 12,000 feet and merge head-on with Lieutenant Samadu's dive bombers. The first and third waves of 7 VALs each break up on contact, losing 3 dive bombers shot down and 3 more too badly damaged to continue, including Lieutenant Samadu. The Zeros flying top cover dive into the melee and shoot down 3 Wildcats, while losing none of their own. The 5 remaining Wildcats exhaust the rest of their ammunition during the short but furious dogfight. 4 more Wildcats meet the remaining VALs at 10,000 feet, and again meet the attackers head-on as they draw ever closer. Rear Admiral George Murray aboard Hornet is in command of Task Force 17, which has been a hive of activity since the Japanese strike was spotted. Deck crews on the carrier pump inert carbon dioxide gas into the aviation fuel lines to prevent serious fires, while any loose ordnance is tossed overboard or stored in the main magazine. Sailors on the bridge beg Rear Admiral Murray to close the steel window slats in order to protect him and Captain Perry Mason. But he dismisses them. "Leave them open. I want to see the show too." The second intercept is less successful. Only one dive bomber is shot down, and although no Wildcats are lost and the Japanese formation is again disrupted, 14 VALs have made it through unscathed. The Japanese now have a clear shot at Hornet, with no more Cat fighters in their path. It's now up to the American anti-aircraft gunners, who are the last line of defence. At 9:09 AM, one of the escorting destroyers opens fire with the VALs less than 11,000 yards away. Captain Mason barks out orders on Hornet's bridge: commence firing on any target in sight, make full speed, and maintain it until further orders. Hornet's 8 5-inch batteries, along with 35 anti-aircraft guns of lesser calibers, open fire on the VALs bearing down on the carrier, which is now moving at its top speed of 28 knots. The first 7 VALs begin their dives at 9:10 AM into furious flak fire from the American warships. Tracers rip past the Japanese pilots. One dive bomber is brought down by anti-aircraft fire, and another shot down by a late arriving Wildcat. Nonetheless, the 5 remaining aircraft press on until they are less than 2,000 feet from the surface of the ocean. The first VAL releases its bomb, which misses off Hornet's starboard bow. However, the second dive bomber scores a direct hit with a 550-pound armour-piercing bomb, which smashes through the flight deck and detonates next to the forward crew messing compartment. 60 of the 65 men in Hornet's forward repair party are killed instantly by the blast. The third VAL is brought down by flak before it can release its bomb and crashes into the sea, 30 feet from Hornet's bow. But the fourth, piloted by Lieutenant Yozo Shimada, bears down and strafes the carrier. Shimada releases a 550-pound high-explosive bomb which detonates on contact with the flight deck, blasting an 11-foot hole in the wooden deck and showering anti-aircraft gunners with hot shrapnel. Shimada's VAL is then shot down by 20mm fire from Hornet, but the rear gunner survives and will be picked up by a Japanese destroyer the next day. Another VAL plants an armour-piercing bomb near the second hit, which penetrates and detonates 4 decks below. Luckily, this bomb detonates in an unoccupied area and no lives are lost. The dive bombing attack is over, and Hornet has taken 3 hits which have killed at least 90 sailors and started several fires. But critically, the ship's engines have not been damaged. A bigger danger is approaching from the rear of Task Force 17. Whilst Wikaku's dive bombers have attracted the attention of most American defences, Commander Murata's Kate torpedo bombers from Shikaku are making a run on Hornet, with 4 Zero fighters leading the way to clear a path through any American fighters. The Japanese fighters surprise 3 Wildcats who have been focused on the dive bombers and shoot 2 down while forcing the last one to flee. 1 Zero is shot down in return. Captain Mason on Hornet's bridge spots the incoming Kates and changes course to force Murata's aircraft to chase the carrier from behind, the most difficult angle of attack for a torpedo bomber. 3 Kates, led by Commander Murata, approach Hornet's starboard quarter at 300 feet above sea level, with American anti-aircraft tracers and flak crisscrossing across the sky. 1 Kate drops its torpedo from 1,500 yards away before anti-aircraft fire shreds the bomber, sending it to the ocean. Murata and his wingman press further to within 1,000 yards of Hornet before they both release their torpedoes. As Murata banks away from his target, his Kate is set on fire by 20mm cannon fire. One of the best pilots in the Japanese Navy and a carrier squadron leader since before the war, Shigeharu Murata is killed as his aircraft comes apart around him and plummets into the sea. His wingman is also damaged but escapes the deadly crossfire. The first torpedo misses, but it will take several minutes for the other 2 to make their way towards the carrier as it attempts to outrun the fish. Another trio of Kates approaches a minute later as American defensive fire is increasing in intensity. 1 bomber is brought down while the remaining 2 launch their torpedoes. thanks in part to Captain Mason's aggressive manoeuvring. Both of them miss. The 5 remaining Kates line up on the carrier. One is shot down as the formation presses through the screen of warships, before 2 more launch their torpedoes. The last 2 break off from Hornet and attempt a run on the heavy cruiser USS Pensacola. One of the Kates drops its torpedo, but the other is damaged, and its pilot decides to crash into Pensacola, and just barely misses. All remaining torpedoes fail to hit anything, but the battle is still not over. While Murata's torpedo bombers have been approaching from Hornet's starboard, 6 dive bombers from Zuikaku are diving on the carrier's port side from 12,000 feet. A Wildcat shoots down one of the valves, but the remaining 5 dive bombers make it through the fighter screen. The first 4 drop their bombs, but all miss the target. The last Val in the line is piloted by Warrant Officer Shigeyuki Sato, but his aircraft is set aflame by American anti-aircraft fire. Without any hesitation, Sato points his doomed bomber directly at Hornet and smashes into the carrier's smokestack near the signal bridge. Flaming aviation fuel kills most of the American signalmen and starts a fire near the island. The Val's armor-piercing bomb also comes to rest near the island, but miraculously does not explode. A final strike group of 4 dive bombers from Zuikaku and 9 torpedo bombers from Shikaku now bears down on the embattled Hornet. Although the American Combat Air Patrol has been pushed to the absolute limit by incessant attacks, 6 more Wildcats move to intercept the newest threat. This time, the Japanese strike aircraft are attacking without a fighter escort, when Lieutenant Hidaka's 9 Zeros from Zuho could have played a decisive role. The Val dive bombers are hit first by 3 Wildcats from Hornet, who take down one of the Japanese aircraft. The Japanese commander is far more cautious without fighter escort, and does not press the attack as aggressively. The 3 remaining Vals fly into intense anti-aircraft fire and drop their bombs, but fail to hit the aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, 3 Wildcats from Enterprise move to intercept the torpedo bombers, making their way towards Task Force 17. Flying on a constant bearing, the slow-moving Kates are slaughtered by the Wildcats. 4 are shot down by the fighters, while another is brought down by anti-aircraft fire. The 4 surviving Kates launch their torpedoes at extreme range, but all miss. On Hornet's bridge, Captain Mason has skillfully avoided all of the Japanese torpedoes so far, leading his command duty officer to say, "I guess they missed us, sir." But at 9:15 AM, Commander Murata's final act before he went down produces results, as his torpedo finally catches up with the carrier. It strikes Hornet just aft of the island, and seconds later, his wingman's torpedo slams into the engineering spaces. Both hits are devastating. The forward engine room and 2 fire rooms are destroyed, causing the carrier to lose power. A 10-degree list to starboard develops as the ship slowly grinds to a halt. At this very moment, a single Val dive bomber trailing smoke arrives over Hornet. The pilot braves the anti-aircraft fire to drop his bomb, which just barely misses the bow. The Val pulls up, circles around the cruiser Northampton, and then slams directly into Hornet's forecastle, igniting yet another fire. Less than a minute later, a flaming Kate torpedo bomber tries to do the same, but misses. The attack is over by 9:20 AM as the Japanese retire back to the northwest, with Wildcats in pursuit. The destroyers USS Morris, Mustin and Russell pull alongside the wounded Hornet to help with firefighting. The carrier is heavily damaged, but the decision to flood the fuel aviation lines with carbon dioxide has saved the ship for the time being. Rear Admiral Murray and Captain Mason confer with the damage control officer, who tells them that for now the ship is in no danger of sinking, but any more direct hits from bombs or torpedoes would doom her. The main priority now is to restore electrical power and transfer the scores of wounded men to other ships. It's a race against time for damage control parties to restore the carrier to battle-worthy condition before the Japanese return. The attack on Hornet is the Kido Butai's finest coordinated attack on an American naval force, but it has come at a hellacious cost. Of the 53 aircraft which arrived over the carrier, just 29 leave the battle space. A further 14 are shot down by pursuing Wildcats or forced to ditch in the ocean due to damage, leaving only 19 aircraft out of the original strike force of 64. This 70% casualty rate is utterly unsustainable, and many of the best pilots in the Imperial Navy have been lost. By comparison, the US Navy's Air Wing has lost just 6 Wildcats. However, 2 torpedoes and 3 bombs, along with 2 kamikaze attacks, have temporarily eliminated one of the 2 American aircraft carriers in the South Pacific. The second wave is now bearing down on the last standing carrier, the USS Enterprise. Thanks to World of Warships for sponsoring this video. Celebrate 250 years of naval history by building your Liberty Harbour today. Click my link in the description to claim your special rewards. New players can join today with the invite code STEPUP250.